You have been treating your changing synchronicities as if something has gone wrong. The numbers appear less often. The familiar symbols have gone quiet. The dreams that once seemed almost prophetic now feel fragmented, strange, or impossible to interpret. The conversations that used to arrive at exactly the right moment have become less obvious. The signs that once reassured you now seem inconsistent, and part of you has begun to wonder whether you have lost your connection, misunderstood your intuition, or wandered away from the path you were meant to follow. But your confusion begins with a false assumption. You assumed that the signs would remain the same even after you changed. You expected the psyche to keep speaking in the language of a life you are already leaving. You expected the same symbols to guide you after their purpose had been fulfilled. You expected reassurance when what you now require is confrontation. You expected repetition when your inner life has already begun demanding movement. Your synchronicities are not disappearing, they are changing because your path is changing. Carl Jung spent decades studying the mysterious relationship between inner transformation and outer events. He used the word synchronicity to describe meaningful coincidences that could not be adequately explained by ordinary cause and effect. These events did not simply happen around a person. They appeared at psychologically charged moments, when something unconscious was pressing toward awareness. A synchronicity, in the Jungian sense, is not merely a pleasant sign from the universe. It is an encounter between your inner condition and the outer world. It becomes meaningful because it reflects something active within you. That means the meaning of the sign depends on the state of the person receiving it. When your inner life changes, the language of the signs must change with it. At the beginning of an awakening, you may need obvious confirmation. You notice repeated numbers, recurring names, unexpected songs, unusual dreams, or chance encounters that seem too precise to dismiss. The experience can feel electrifying because it breaks through the dead surface of ordinary life. It tells you that your existence is not as random, isolated, or mechanical as you once believed. But the psyche does not offer the same lesson forever. What first awakens you can later become another form of sleep. You may begin by noticing synchronicities, but eventually you can become dependent on them. You start looking outward before you act. You delay decisions until the right symbol appears. You ask for signs when you already know the answer. You interpret every coincidence as guidance, because uncertainty has become difficult to tolerate. At that point, the synchronicity no longer serves your development. Your relationship to it has become a defense against development. Jung understood that the psyche seeks wholeness, not comfort. It does not organize your life around preserving the version of you that feels safest. It draws you toward individuation, the painful process of becoming more fully yourself. Individuation requires you to distinguish the voice of the deeper self from fear, projection, social conditioning, and wishful thinking. This is why the signs often change when a familiar identity begins to dissolve. A woman once noticed the same song every time she considered leaving a relationship that had become emotionally empty. She heard it in a cafe, then in a taxi, then through the wall of a neighboring apartment. For months, she treated the song as confirmation that she would eventually find the courage to leave. Yet each evening, she placed her phone face down, told herself the timing was not right, and continued living exactly as before. Eventually, the song stopped appearing. She believed the silence meant she had missed her chance. What the silence actually revealed was more difficult. She no longer needed another sign. She needed to accept responsibility for what she already knew. This is the psychological mechanism beneath many changing synchronicities. A symbol appears while it is helping an unconscious truth become conscious. Once that truth has reached the threshold of awareness, repetition may no longer be useful. The psyche withdraws the symbol because your task has changed. At first, you were being asked to notice. Now you are being asked to choose. That shift can feel like abandonment because signs often provide emotional containment. They make you feel accompanied. They give shape to uncertainty. They suggest that something larger is holding the thread of your life, even when you cannot see where it leads. When those signs change, you may feel exposed, but exposure is often part of the next stage. The psyche cannot strengthen your capacity for inner authority while constantly supplying external reassurance. At some point, the bridge must be crossed without another confirmation appearing beneath your feet. Your old synchronicities belonged to an earlier version of your identity. Jung saw the personality not as a fixed structure, but as a living system that reorganizes itself through conflict, loss, and encounter with the unconscious. The ego builds a coherent identity from roles, memories, values, and social expectations. You learn who you are by adapting to family, culture, work, relationships, and the demands of survival. That identity may function for years. Then something begins to strain against it. You become restless without knowing why. Certain conversations exhaust you. Goals that once motivated you begin to feel hollow. You feel less able to perform enthusiasm. You notice resentment in places where you once offered automatic agreement. You sense that your life is still recognizable, yet no longer inhabited by the person you are becoming. During this transition, synchronicities may become unfamiliar because the unconscious is no longer reinforcing your established self-image. It is introducing symbols connected to what has been neglected, repressed, or left undeveloped. A man spent years seeing images of open roads whenever he doubted his career. A road appeared on a book cover, in a dream, and in a photograph sent by an old friend. He interpreted the symbol as encouragement to keep moving forward in the profession he had chosen. Then the roads disappeared, and images of locked rooms began appearing instead. He paused at office doors without knowing why. He dreamed of searching for a key while hearing someone breathe behind a wall. The first symbol had supported movement. The second demanded that he examine where his movement had become escape. What you are calling inconsistency may be the psyche refusing to flatter your preferred interpretation. A symbol is alive only when it can change. The moment you reduce synchronicity to a fixed code, you stop relating to the unconscious and begin controlling it. You decide that a certain number always means protection. A particular animal always means transformation. A repeated name always means a specific person will return. You turn a living psychological event into a predictable message system. But the unconscious does not speak like an instruction manual. Jung approached symbols as expressions that contain more meaning than the conscious mind can immediately understand. A genuine symbol is not a sign with one permanent definition. It holds tension. It develops as you develop. It reveals one layer, then another. The same image can mean invitation at one stage and warning at another. Water may first represent emotional awakening. Later, it may reveal emotional flooding. A closed door may first represent rejection. Later, it may become protection. A recurring person may appear to represent destiny, then eventually reveal projection. This is why you cannot understand changing synchronicities by searching for universal definitions alone. You have to ask, what is happening in your life now? You have to notice what emotion rises with the event. You have to examine what decision you are avoiding, what fantasy you are protecting, what identity is losing its authority, and what part of you is asking to be recognized. A woman repeatedly saw a white bird during a period of grief. It landed near her car after difficult appointments. It appeared outside her kitchen window on mornings when she could barely get out of bed. She associated it with peace, and the image helped her endure what she could not yet understand. 2 years later, another white bird struck the window of her office and flew away. This time she did not feel comfort. She felt panic, followed by an immediate awareness of how trapped she had become in work she despised. The symbol had not betrayed its former meaning. Her relationship to peace had changed. What once meant endurance now meant release. Your confusion may be the first sign that you are finally encountering the symbol instead of merely consuming it. The ego wants synchronicity to confirm what it has already decided. Jung understood the ego as necessary, but limited. It organizes conscious life, creates continuity, and allows you to function. Yet it naturally interprets experience in ways that preserve its existing position. It prefers messages that support familiar desires. It resists meanings that threaten identity, attachment, status, or control. This is why synchronicity can be easily recruited into self-deception. You notice the sign that supports the relationship and ignore the exhaustion you feel after every conversation. You notice the number that seems to promise abundance and ignore the financial pattern that requires discipline. You notice the dream that suggests a new beginning and ignore the grief that must be faced before anything genuinely new can emerge. You are not necessarily lying to yourself consciously. You may be protecting yourself from a truth that would rearrange your life. A man asked repeatedly for a sign about whether he should reconnect with someone from his past. Each time her name appeared, he felt a rush of certainty. He began noticing initials on license plates and songs they once shared. Yet when she finally sent a brief message, he stared at the screen for 20 minutes and felt his stomach tighten. He did not want the actual relationship. He wanted relief from the wound of being forgotten. The synchronicities were real as psychological events. His interpretation of them was incomplete. The repeated name did not necessarily mean reunion. It revealed where his emotional energy remained bound. What you have been calling guidance may sometimes be a mirror, showing you where your projection still lives. Projection is one of the most important mechanisms in Jungian psychology. It occurs when you experience an unconscious part of yourself as though it belongs entirely to someone or something outside you. You may project your unlived strength onto a powerful person. You may project your tenderness onto someone you idealize. You may project your fear onto a situation and call it intuition. Synchronicities often gather around projections because projections carry enormous psychic energy. The outer person or event becomes charged. Everything connected to it seems meaningful. A name appears repeatedly. A place keeps returning. A phrase follows you. The intensity convinces you that the object itself must hold the answer. Sometimes it does, but often, the deeper purpose is to retrieve the part of yourself that you placed there. This is why certain synchronicities diminish after a relationship ends. A mentor disappoints you, or an ideal collapses. The psyche may be withdrawing energy from the projection so that it can return to you. At first, the silence feels empty. Then you begin to recognize that the courage you admired was your own unlived courage. The creativity you worshipped was your own neglected creativity. The emotional depth you believed existed only in another person was a depth you had refused to claim. A woman kept meeting people who reminded her of a former partner. The same mannerisms appeared. The same hometown was mentioned. Even the same uncommon phrase surfaced in unrelated conversations. She took each coincidence as proof that the relationship was spiritually unfinished. Then one afternoon, while watching a stranger gesture with the same nervous movement, she suddenly recognized not him, but herself. She had spent years waiting for him to choose the life she was afraid to choose alone. The synchronicity changed when the projection weakened. The person stopped being the message. Her own unlived life became the message. What you are grieving as the loss of a connection may be the return of your own psychic energy. Your path is changing because your shadow is changing. You may think of the shadow as a fixed collection of flaws, anger, shame, envy, or unacceptable impulses. Jung's understanding was more complex. The shadow includes everything the conscious personality refuses to identify with. This can include destructive tendencies, but it also includes vitality, ambition, sensuality, authority, creativity, instinct, and the capacity to say no. As you integrate one layer of shadow, another becomes visible. This is not failure, it is depth. At one stage, your shadow may contain your anger. Synchronicities arise around conflict, aggression, fire, broken objects, or confrontational people. You begin to see how often you abandon yourself to preserve harmony. Later, after you learn to recognize anger, the deeper shadow may contain tenderness. You have become capable of boundaries, but now you use strength to avoid vulnerability. The symbols change. You begin noticing children, injured animals, old letters, quiet houses, or memories that carry a softer grief. The path changes because the psyche no longer needs to show you what you have already begun to integrate. It points toward the next contradiction. A man spent months encountering aggressive dogs during a period when he was learning to defend himself. They appeared in dreams, behind fences, and in stories told by friends. He began to understand how thoroughly he had repressed his own aggression. Years later, the dogs vanished from his inner life. Instead, he dreamed repeatedly of a small dog waiting in the rain while he watched from inside a house. His task was no longer to develop teeth. It was to open the door. What you call mixed messages may be the psyche revealing that growth is not a straight line toward greater hardness, purity, confidence, or certainty. Wholeness requires contradiction. You are asked to become stronger, then softer, more independent, then more receptive, more discerning, then less defended, more willing to leave, then more capable of staying. Each stage corrects the imbalance created by the previous stage. Your synchronicities change because the unconscious is not building a brand around your awakening. It is building a whole person. The signs become quieter when your capacity for discernment must become stronger. Early synchronicities are often dramatic because the conscious mind is difficult to interrupt. You may be deeply identified with rational control, social expectations, or a life organized entirely around external demands. The unconscious has to speak loudly enough to be noticed. A coincidence arrives with such precision that you cannot dismiss it. A dream shocks you awake. A stranger says the exact sentence you had written privately that morning. A book falls open to a passage that seems written for your situation. These experiences loosen the ego's certainty. They reveal that your conscious plan is not the whole story. But if every meaningful event remained dramatic, you would never develop subtle perception. You would become addicted to intensity. The quieter stage asks more of you. The sign may arrive as a bodily contraction during a conversation. It may appear as a sentence you cannot forget, though no one else finds it significant. It may be the absence of energy when you imagine continuing a certain life. It may be the unexpected calm that appears when you consider a frightening choice. These are easier to ignore because they do not overwhelm you. They require participation. Jung's work repeatedly emphasized the necessity of holding tension between conscious and unconscious material. You are not meant to obey every impulse that feels meaningful. You are meant to enter into relationship with it. You reflect, observe, test, and remain willing to be corrected. A woman once relied on repeated numbers whenever she needed to make a decision. She checked the clock before sending messages. She counted receipts. She delayed leaving home until the pattern felt favorable. Then the numbers stopped appearing during a major career choice. For several weeks she felt abandoned, until she noticed a simpler truth. Every time she imagined accepting the position, her jaw tightened and her breathing became shallow. The old sign had vanished. The body had become the messenger. What you are calling spiritual silence may be an invitation to listen beneath spectacle. Your path changes when your values change, even before your circumstances do. The outer structure of your life may remain the same, while its psychological meaning has already shifted. You still live in the same place. You still speak to the same people. You still perform the same work. From the outside, nothing appears different. Inside, the agreement has been withdrawn. This creates a strange period in which your life continues, but your identification with it weakens. You move through familiar rooms with the feeling that you are visiting them. Conversations sound rehearsed. Goals seem to belong to someone you used to be. You may feel guilty because nothing is obviously wrong, yet you cannot return to your former enthusiasm. During this stage, synchronicities often stop reinforcing continuity. They begin interrupting it. You hear about a place you have never considered. You meet someone who lives according to values you have suppressed. A forgotten skill returns through an unexpected request. A childhood interest appears in several unrelated conversations. The signs no longer say, "Keep going." They ask, "Whose life are you continuing?" A man had built a stable identity around being dependable. He answered messages quickly, solved problems, and rarely disappointed anyone. During 1 month, 3 separate people described him as reliable, and each compliment left him strangely irritated. Then he found an old notebook containing stories he had written as a teenager. He sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, turning the pages slowly, while his unanswered phone vibrated beside him. The synchronicity was not the notebook alone. It was the collision between the praised identity and the abandoned self. What you are calling restlessness may be the self refusing to let adaptation become destiny. The self, in Jungian psychology, is not simply your preferred personality or your ideal future image. It is the deeper organizing principle of the whole psyche. It includes consciousness and unconsciousness, what you know and what you have not yet become. The ego asks, "How can I preserve the life I understand?" The self asks, "What form of life allows more of the whole person to exist?" Synchronicities often intensify when these two orientations come into conflict. But the signs will not always support the ego's timeline. You may receive a powerful confirmation, then encounter a delay. You may feel drawn toward a new direction, then lose the opportunity you thought would carry you there. You may meet someone who awakens something profound, only for the relationship to remain brief. You interpret the interruption as contradiction because you assume the outer form was the purpose. Often, the psychological movement was the purpose. The opportunity revealed your desire. The person awakened a dormant capacity. The loss exposed your dependency. The delay forced the fantasy to mature into commitment. A woman met a stranger during a short trip and experienced an immediate sense of recognition. Their conversation lasted less than an hour, yet it opened questions she had avoided for years. She expected the encounter to become a relationship, and when no further contact came, she felt deceived by the intensity. Months later, she applied to study the subject they had discussed and changed the direction of her work. The person did not stay. The path did. What you have been calling a failed sign may have succeeded at a level your ego did not prefer. Your synchronicities also change when your relationship to time changes. The ego wants immediate interpretation. It wants to know what the event means, what will happen next, and whether the outcome will be favorable. Uncertainty feels unbearable because it exposes the limits of control. But symbolic meaning often unfolds slowly. An event may appear meaningless until months later, when another experience reveals its place in the pattern. A dream may seem confusing until you encounter the emotion it was preparing you to recognize. A repeated image may follow you for years before you understand what part of your life it was describing. Jung did not treat the unconscious as a machine delivering instant predictions. He treated it as a living reality with its own timing. This timing is not always compassionate toward your impatience. You may have to carry a symbol without solving it. You may have to let an encounter remain unfinished. You may have to resist building a grand explanation around something that has not yet revealed its meaning. A man dreamed of an empty train station several times during a period of personal upheaval. He searched for interpretations and decided it meant he was about to begin a new journey. Nothing changed. A year later, after declining an opportunity because he feared disappointing his family, the dream returned. This time he noticed the detail he had ignored. The train was already leaving while he stood beside a suitcase he refused to pick up. The symbol had not changed. His capacity to see it had. What you are calling delay may be the time required for your conscious mind to become capable of receiving the message. Yet there is a deeper cost hidden beneath all of this, and it is the part you may still be trying to avoid. You may not actually want guidance. You may want permission without consequence. You may want the synchronicity to promise that the right choice will not hurt anyone, cost anything, expose you to uncertainty, or force you to surrender an identity that once protected you. You ask for another sign because the previous one did not remove the price of acting. You want certainty before leaving, certainty before speaking, certainty before committing, certainty before disappointing someone, certainty before choosing a life that cannot be explained to the people who only understand the version of you that served them. But no genuine path offers that kind of certainty. Individuation is not the process of receiving enough signs to avoid sacrifice. It is the process of becoming conscious of what you are willing to sacrifice for a life that is psychologically true. This is where your changing synchronicities become most uncomfortable. The old signs may have helped you survive. They reassured you that your pain had meaning. They gave you hope during confusion. They helped you imagine that another life was possible. The new signs may no longer comfort you. They may expose your complicity. They may show you that you keep returning to the same wound because it protects you from a more demanding future. They may reveal that you call something fate because you are afraid to call it habit. They may confront the way you use sensitivity to avoid conflict, spirituality to avoid grief, intuition to avoid evidence, or patience to avoid a decision. You may begin seeing symbols of endings, decay, empty houses, missed trains, closed shops, old clothes, or broken clocks. You may feel uneasy because the imagery does not match the hopeful language you associated with awakening. But the psyche is not threatening you. It is showing you what can no longer be carried forward. The death of an identity can feel like the death of meaning itself. You may lose interest in communities that once gave you language. Teachings that once changed your life may begin to sound repetitive. Practices that once brought peace may feel mechanical. You may wonder whether you have become cynical or disconnected. Sometimes this is avoidance. Sometimes it is development. A spiritual framework can become a psychological home, and homes can become prisons when you remain inside them after your life has outgrown their walls. You may have built an identity around being the intuitive one, the awakened one, the empathic one, the person who notices signs others miss. That identity may have helped you reclaim dignity after years of feeling unseen. But even a healing identity can become restrictive. You may begin filtering every experience through it. You may reject ordinary explanations because they feel less special. You may confuse emotional intensity with spiritual significance. You may fear that losing the signs means losing the person you became through them. This is the shadow beneath the shadow. You are not only afraid of losing guidance, you may be afraid of becoming ordinary again. Yet individuation does not make you more special than other people. It makes you more responsible for the life that is yours. The path becomes less theatrical as it becomes more real. There may be fewer dramatic confirmations and more difficult conversations, fewer visions and more boundaries, fewer promises of destiny and more mornings when you must continue without applause, fewer symbols telling you who you are and more moments when your choices reveal it. This stage costs you the innocence of believing that awareness alone is transformation. You can understand every pattern and still refuse to change it. You can identify every projection and still return to the person carrying it. You can recognize every synchronicity and still betray the truth it awakens. The most painful possibility is not that you misunderstood the signs. It is that you understood them and hoped understanding would be enough. Your path is changing now because the distance between insight and action has become impossible to ignore. You do not need to force yourself into a sudden decision. You do not need to treat every coincidence as a command. You do not need to abandon reason, practical judgment, or the support of people who can help you see what you cannot see alone. You are allowed to move carefully, but you are no longer allowed to pretend that endless interpretation is the same as movement. You are allowed to stop demanding that the universe repeat itself until your fear feels satisfied. You are allowed to stop searching for the old symbols as proof that you have not been forgotten. You are allowed to let a former meaning die without declaring the entire experience false. You are allowed to admit that a sign helped you once and no longer belongs to the life unfolding now. The silence may not be punishment, it may be trust. The psyche may be withdrawing the form of guidance that kept you dependent so that another form of knowing can emerge. Not perfect certainty, not mystical immunity from mistakes. A quieter capacity to recognize when your actions and your inner truth have moved too far apart. You may still notice numbers, dreams, names, songs, animals, meetings, and strange convergences. But you do not have to chase them. You do not have to build your identity around being chosen by them. You can receive them with attention, curiosity, and restraint. You can ask what they awaken rather than what they guarantee. You can ask what part of you has become active rather than what outcome has been promised. You can ask what responsibility follows from the meaning you feel. Your path changes when you stop asking every sign to tell you where to go and begin noticing what direction makes you more honest. This does not make the world less mysterious. It makes your participation in the mystery more mature. You were never meant to remain the person who first noticed the signs. That person needed wonder because life had become too narrow. That person needed interruption because the conscious mind had become too certain. That person needed reassurance because the unknown felt unbearable. You can honor that stage without remaining inside it. Now the signs may arrive differently. They may arrive as resistance to a role you can no longer perform. They may arrive as grief when you imagine abandoning something essential. They may arrive as relief when you finally speak a sentence you have rehearsed silently for years. They may arrive as the absence of excitement for a future you once believed you wanted. They may arrive as a growing inability to participate in your own erasure. These are synchronicities too, not because every feeling predicts an external event, but because your inner and outer life are beginning to reveal the same pattern. The world is no longer confirming who you were. It is reflecting the tension of who you are becoming. So the changing signs are not evidence that you have left your path. They may be evidence that the old path has completed its work. You are not losing the language of your life. You are being asked to stop reading every new chapter with the vocabulary of the last one. If this resonates, subscribe to The Waking Shadow, where you explore Jung's psychology for those walking the path of individuation. Watch the video on your screen now to understand what happens when your old identity can no longer follow you into the life that is beginning.